Hey guys, good evening.
I'm Mr. 13 o'clock.
Every night I share 13 terrifying true stories you won't forget. So hit that subscribe button and comment below where are you watching from. Now settle in, the night is waiting. They say hospitals never sleep. But what they don't say is, some things inside them never leave. In 2013, a rural hospital in Pennsylvania reported an internal incident that never made the news. Not because it wasn't serious, but because no one could explain it without sounding insane. Started simply with a single patient pressing their call button. Room 219, 4:06 a.m. A 74-year-old man recovering from surgery said a nurse had visited him in the night. She didn't speak. She didn't adjust his fore. She just stood at the foot of the bed and smiled for minutes. Then she walked away, still smiling. When morning came, the man casually mentioned it to the day nurse during rounds. "Who was the lady in all white?" he asked. The nurse was confused. "No one fits that description," she replied. "There's no night nurse on this floor in white. We wear navy scrubs now." At first, they chalked it up to medication confusion. Post-op hallucinations weren't uncommon, after all. But then it happened again and again. Other patients, unrelated in separate wings of the hospital, reported seeing the same woman. Pale skin, dark eyes, uniforms that didn't match the current dress code. And always that same, unreadable smile. Security was alerted. Cameras checked. But there was no trace of any unauthorized person. In fact, the cameras never showed her at all. Just patients suddenly reacting, gasping, sitting upright, crying, at seemingly nothing in their rooms. One nurse, Julia, finally took it upon herself to investigate. She worked nights on the surgical floor and had grown tired of the stories. Some of her co-workers had even started swapping shifts to avoid the haunted wing. Julia didn't believe in that. She believed in stress, poor lighting, and morphine-induced dreams. But she also believed in routine. And that's why what happened next disturbed her more than anything else. One night, during her 3 a.m. check-ins, she passed by room 217. The light above the door was dim, flickering slightly. Inside, an elderly woman with a mild respiratory issue was supposed to be sleeping. Julia checked her chart, all normal. Oxygen level steady. But when she opened the door, the patient was staring at the wall, whispering something. Julia leaned in. "She's back," the woman said. "She said you'll be next." That night, Julia didn't sleep. She started digging through the hospital's old records, curious if there had ever been a nurse who matched the descriptions being given. White uniform, pale, dark eyes. It took some persuasion, but an old janitor who'd worked there for decades eventually mentioned something odd. There was a nurse back in the 70s. Laura something. Never smiled. Never blinked. Creeped people out. Died on the job. Heart attack in the stairwell between 2nd and 3rd floor. Official records confirmed it. Laura Bishop. Pronounced dead in 1977. One photo remained in a back hallway. Grainy, black and white. She was wearing a white dress uniform, pressed and dated. A style that hadn't been used in hospitals for over 40 years. The weird thing? The face in that photo looked just like the one patients had been describing. Julia's curiosity turned to unease. Still, she needed proof. So she started leaving small notes inside certain patient rooms. Notes only she and the patients could read. If they mentioned the woman again, she'd ask them what the notes said. One of the patients, a mute stroke victim in room 206, suddenly began scribbling on their meal napkins. The notes were just 2 words, over and over, "She knows." Julia started seeing movement in the periphery of her vision during rounds. White flashes, smiling shadows reflected in the glass of empty ICU bays. But the cameras still showed nothing. Her co-workers began to distance themselves. She became the nurse people avoided, always chasing ghosts while everyone else tried to get through the shift without losing their minds. Then came the worst night. It was quiet, oddly quiet. No monitors beeping. No call buttons. Even the emergency room was still. Julia walked her usual path down the east hallway when she saw the elevator doors open on their own. No one inside, or so she thought. The interior camera caught something strange that time. A flicker. A frame. Just one less than a second long. A face. Pale. Smiling. Centered perfectly in the lens. When the footage was slowed, the face was looking directly into the camera. But no one had been near the elevator when it happened. Julia never returned after that night. She filed for immediate leave, citing exhaustion, and left the hospital within 24 hours. Her resignation letter had only one line. "I was never on the schedule either." It wasn't until 2 weeks later that the hospital IT team ran a software update on their old employee badge scanner system. It automatically archived old access logs, some going back decades. While clearing corrupted data, they found something strange. In the logs from that week, someone had been badging into the second-floor stairwell repeatedly between 3 and 4 a.m. The ID code? Hashtag 1977LB. An ID number format not used since the 1980s. The hospital never released a public statement. The staff doesn't talk about it anymore. But some say if you're admitted to the second floor, room 219 especially, you might see her. She won't hurt you. She doesn't speak. But she will smile. And she'll stand just long enough for you to realize she's not there to help. They said room 403 was empty. But the heart monitor inside it beeped every night at 2:44 a.m. It wasn't a malfunction. The machine wasn't even plugged in. Hospitals are places where life begins and ends, where time stretches and folds in on itself. You'd think after thousands of births and deaths, some sort of energy would linger. But in some wings, it doesn't just linger. It waits. It watches. And sometimes it answers back. In the East Wing of a mid-sized hospital in Ohio, known locally for its psychiatric annex and unusually high patient turnover, there's a room that staff have quietly agreed not to speak about. Room 403. On paper, it's been marked as decommissioned for over 6 years. No new patients. No equipment requests. No nurse rounds. And yet, strange reports kept trickling in. It began with whispers. Quite literally. Nurses working the overnight shift reported hearing soft voices behind the door. They couldn't make out the words, just a gentle murmuring, like someone comforting a dying loved one, or maybe pleading. Security was called multiple times. Each time the room was checked. Each time it was locked. Each time nothing was found. One nurse, who requested her name not be used, shared that during one particularly quiet night, she passed by 403 and noticed light leaking from beneath the door. A soft, flickering glow, as if someone inside was watching television. But there were no TVs in that wing. When she opened the door, the light vanished. The room was dark, completely empty, but the air smelled like bleach and something else. Hospitals often carry the scent of chemicals, antiseptics, and sickness. But this was different. She described it as the smell of something too clean, artificial, almost like someone was trying too hard to hide something. This is where the story begins to twist. Months after these incidents, a new intern was assigned to shadow in the ER. On her third night, she wandered into the East Wing by mistake. While trying to find a vending machine, she passed room 403. The door was open. Inside, an old man was sitting on the bed, pale, still, eyes wide open but not blinking. Thinking he was a patient who had wandered off or been forgotten, she stepped inside. She called out. He didn't respond. His gown looked old, yellowed at the edges, not like the standard issue ones used now. As she approached, the man slowly turned his head and looked straight at her. She froze. His mouth didn't move, but she heard his voice. Clear, calm, almost sad. "You're not supposed to be here yet." That's when she blinked, and the bed was empty, completely untouched. The room was clean, light off, dust covering the surfaces. Her supervisor later confirmed. Room 403 had been sealed since 2017. The man she described, balding, liver-spotted, and dressed in an older-style patient gown, matched no one on the current or past patient logs. But her description eerily mirrored a photo found in a file from over 2 decades ago. The man's name was Albert N., A terminal patient who reportedly died during a late-night code in room 403 back in 2003. But that's not the eerie part. What's unsettling is that, according to the file, Albert was pronounced dead at 2:44 a.m., the same time the heart monitor beeps every night in the empty room. And if you think this is just a ghost story, consider this. During an electrical maintenance scan of the East Wing, technicians found something strange. Room 403 was drawing a small but constant amount of power. Barely detectable but consistent. As if something inside the room was still connected. Still alive. When they attempted to cut the circuit manually, the system glitched. Every monitor on the floor briefly spiked. Flat lines across the board, followed by a slow return to normal. Several patients reported terrifying dreams that night. Dreams of a man in a hospital bed calling them by name, telling them to stay. There's a pattern here that goes deeper than ghost sightings. Room 403 appears to follow a kind of ritual schedule. Every few months, someone sees the old man. Every night, at the same time, the monitor beeps. And nearly every year, around the week of Albert's death, someone reports hearing the words, "You're not supposed to be here yet." It's as if the room is caught in a loop. Like time forgot to finish its job there. Or maybe something inside refused to let go. But here's the twist no one noticed until recently. A junior IT staff member found a set of archived logs from 2011 when room 403 briefly reopened for a renovation project that was eventually canceled. Inside those logs, a memo stated that the room had suffered unexplained electrical surges and consistent temperature drops, down to 39 degrees Fahrenheit at times. Nurses refused to work in it. Several reported nausea, migraines, and a strange sense of dread while inside. One staff member even quit after claiming to see her reflection move out of sync in the mirror above the sink. The mirror, by the way, has since been removed. But no one seems to know why. There's one final detail that ties this all together, and it might be the most disturbing. A security camera facing the hallway near room 403 captured footage from March of last year. At 2:44 a.m., the feed showed the door creak open slowly. No one inside. No one in the hall. Just an empty corridor. And a door that opened by itself. Seconds later, a faint shadow crossed the threshold. It didn't have a shape. It didn't walk. It drifted. The camera glitched. When the feed returned, the door was shut. And at that exact moment, a patient 3 rooms down went into cardiac arrest. She survived, but claimed her last memory before blacking out was of a man at the foot of her bed. She said he looked tired, sad, and she remembered only one thing he said before everything went dark. "It's not your time. Hospitals are full of thresholds, between life and death, past and present, what's remembered and what's forgotten. But some rooms refused to close their doors. They said room 403 was empty. But maybe it's not about what's inside the room. Maybe it's about who's still waiting to leave." They sealed off the burn unit for a reason. Not because of infection. Not because of renovation. But because too many people came out of it whispering the same words. It was watching me. The hospital was old. One of those mid-century concrete giants with buzzing fluorescent lights and elevators that shook slightly before every stop. The burn unit sat on the 5th floor, tucked away behind double doors that hadn't been used in over a decade. Most staff barely remembered it was there. But during a staff shortage last winter, that changed. A sudden spike in patients pushed the hospital over capacity. Rooms were full. Beds lined the hallways. The administration made a desperate call. Open the old burn unit. Clean it up. Reconnect the electricity. Use it temporarily. It took 3 janitors to pry open those swollen doors. They groaned like something alive. The air that rushed out wasn't stale. It was cold, unnaturally so. And it smelled like charred fabric, even though there hadn't been a fire in years. The first patient assigned to the reopened unit was a man in his 60s, recovering from a minor surgery. He was lucid, quiet, but within hours he began pressing the call button, repeatedly. He claimed someone was pacing outside his room, dragging what sounded like a metal object along the floor. Nurses checked. The hallway was empty. He insisted. She's out there. She's burned. Security was notified. Cameras were checked. Nothing. Still, the patient refused to sleep. He demanded to be moved. By morning, he was found curled in the corner of his room, wide-eyed and unresponsive. His vitals were fine, but he wouldn't speak again. He was transferred out and another patient was moved in. The same night, the same complaint. Footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate. But this time, the figure moved closer. The patient, a young woman recovering from pneumonia, described seeing a woman standing at the end of the hallway. Her hair was patchy, her skin blistered, and most disturbingly, she had no eyes, just blackened sockets that somehow still stared. When the nurses arrived, they found the woman hiding under her bed, sobbing. She said the burned woman kept whispering, "You shouldn't be here." The burn unit was quickly becoming a problem. And then, it escalated. A nurse named Tara, who worked the night shift, volunteered to monitor the unit alone. She didn't believe in the stories, said it was all just stress and suggestion. But after one night up there, she never came back to work. Her sister, who spoke to her the day after, said Tara was different. She'd always been rational, grounded, but now she was jumpy, unblinking. She kept checking the corners of her apartment. She wouldn't say what happened in the unit. Just one phrase over and over. "It watches from behind the glass." When they checked her final shift log, they found it incomplete. But one sentence was scrawled at the bottom of the page, barely legible. "Room 513 has no window, but I saw her face pressed to the glass." The hospital administration, fearing liability, shut down the burn unit again. Patients were relocated. Doors were sealed. But whispers continued, especially from maintenance workers and security. One guard, who took the freight elevator up to 5 by accident, said the lights in the hallway flickered wildly as he passed the burn unit doors. And in the reflection of the elevator's steel wall, he saw someone behind him. But when he turned, no one was there, just the sealed door. What makes this story so disturbing isn't just the sightings or the cold, creeping fear that radiates from that floor. It's the collective consistency of the reports, all unconnected yet eerily similar. Each person describes the woman severely burned, empty sockets where her eyes should be, a presence that doesn't move fast, but watches, a metal dragging sound, like an 4-pole or something heavier being scraped across tile. Some believe she was a former patient from the original burn unit, one who died alone, maybe during a power outage. Forgotten, locked in. But others suggest something darker. Burn units are unlike any other part of a hospital. They're filled with agony, physical and emotional. Survivors often suffer in silence, isolated due to infection risk. And when death comes, it's usually slow, painful, lonely. Some paranormal researchers believe trauma that intense doesn't leave easily, that suffering etches itself into the walls, especially if it ends in injustice. Digging through old hospital records, a few disturbing notes appear. In 1998, during a night shift, a patient in the burn unit went missing. Her name was Adrienne Hall, 34 years old. Severe third-degree burns over 60% of her body. According to her file, she was immobile, couldn't walk, could barely move, yet she vanished. No one saw her leave. No alarms triggered. No cameras caught her. The official explanation? Clerical error. They said she had been transferred, but no paperwork existed. Her belongings were never claimed. Her name never appeared at any other facility. And strangely, her room? It was room 513, the very room where Tara claimed to see a face pressed against the glass. This opens the door to something much darker. Not just a residual haunting, but an active one. Presence aware of intruders. Territorial. Intelligent. Why would it watch? Why would it let them see it? But never speak. Some theorize it's not trying to scare. It's trying to warn. You shouldn't be here. Maybe it's not about the living invading her space, but about the unit itself. Maybe that floor is wrong. A place soaked in pain, in forgotten stories and abandoned lives. Maybe the burned woman is the only one still guarding it. After all, what's more terrifying than dying in agony? Being erased. They say you can still hear the metal dragging sound late at night if you're near the old elevator. And if you stand by the sealed doors of the burn unit and press your ear against the cold metal, you might hear breathing. But if you knock, whatever's behind it might knock back. They say a code blue means a patient is dying. But what happens when that code is called from the morgue, where every patient is already dead? On a cold October night in Michigan, an entire hospital wing froze in fear when a flatline came alive. It was a quiet shift, or at least it should have been. Late night in the lower levels of Pinebrook Medical Center usually meant routine rounds, tired nurses, and the hum of fluorescent lights flickering overhead. But that night, something changed. 2:47 a.m. A code blue alarm echoed through the intercom. A jarring, mechanical voice crackling. Code blue. Room B3. Code blue. Room B3. Only, Room B3 wasn't in use. Not anymore. Room B3 was located in the hospital's morgue. That's where the confusion started. On the surface, it seemed like a systems glitch. Maybe a test. Maybe a prank. But if that were the case, why was the alarm synced with a monitor? Why did the nurse on-call report an actual heart rate reading, 67 BPM, coming from a flatline body? Security reviewed the logs. The patient in question had been declared dead at 11:22 p.m. A man in his 70s, cardiac arrest. Autopsy scheduled for morning. There was no one in the morgue besides him. The medical monitor had been unplugged. And yet, at 2:47 a.m., the heart monitor reactivated on its own and began recording a pulse. That alone would have been unsettling. But it's what happened next that no one could explain. One of the overnight nurses, Melissa, was sent to investigate. She joked about it at first, said it was probably a blown fuse or a maintenance error. But she never came back up. They found her nearly 2 hours later, sitting silently beside the body, eyes wide, hands trembling. She hadn't spoken a word since. But here's the thing, the body had changed. The toe tag was missing. The zipper on the body bag had been unsealed halfway. Not by a scalpel. From the inside, Melissa was placed on leave and admitted for psychiatric evaluation. Her official statement, short as it was, chilled the hospital board. He sat up. He looked right at me. He smiled. Now, most hospitals chalk these things up to stress. Burnout. The human brain can hallucinate under pressure, and long shifts can bend reality into fragments. But Pinebrook Medical had a history, one not listed in any medical records. Staff whispered about it. Pattern. For the past 6 years, every October 21st, at exactly 2:47 a.m., a code blue was issued from room B3. No patient, no staff, just the same dead room, and the same impossible heartbeat. Hospital IT traced the equipment. No tampering, no crossed wires, and most chillingly, no electricity at all was being fed into the machine at that time. So how did it power on? One retired technician claimed the wiring in the morgue was odd. That room B3 had once been part of the original wing, built over 70 years ago when the hospital sat beside an asylum. The two buildings had since been separated, but rumors remained. Rumors of shared tunnels, unmarked transfers, and forgotten patients. One particular patient came up repeatedly in internal archives. Patient 3B17. No name, no next of kin. Declared legally dead after a series of electroshock treatments in the early 1950s. His body was never claimed. Some staff believe that he never really left. And here's where the story bends from chilling to uncanny. In 2011, a new physician named Dr. Caldwell experienced the code blue incident firsthand. He responded personally, frustrated by what he thought was a prank. When he reached the morgue, he too heard the monitor beeping. But when he entered room B3, the beeping stopped. Total silence, except for the clicking sound, like fingernails tapping against metal. He turned. The drawer where patient 3B17 had once been kept, the oldest rusting slab in the morgue, was slightly ajar. What he remembered next defied all medical logic. Caldwell claimed he felt a pressure in the room, like someone was standing behind him, not breathing, just watching. He never told the board about the figure he thought he saw in the freezer's reflection. Figure not lying down, but crouching. When Caldwell tried to pull open the drawer fully, it refused to budge. Something was holding it from inside. He never went back. So what does it mean? Could this be a case of mass suggestion? The power of myth weaving into the minds of overworked staff? Or something more residual? Some paranormal researchers describe locations like this as echo chambers, places saturated with unresolved energy, especially where the dead are left in limbo, unclaimed, unnamed, unseen. The term code blue becomes almost symbolic here. It's supposed to signal a chance to save a life, a final attempt, a medical fight against death. But in this case, it's a call coming from death itself, as if the boundary between life and death blurs for a moment, just long enough for something to reach back. And that 2:47 a.m. timestamp is not random. Hospital administrators later discovered that patient 3B17's time of death was officially recorded at 2:47 a.m., exactly 74 years ago, on October 21st. To the minute, there's one final detail. The last time the code blue was triggered, in 2022, the alarm system malfunctioned, but the message still played. Only this time, it didn't say room B3. It simply repeated one phrase. "He's not done yet," over and over, until someone ripped the speaker from the wall. And that heart monitor, it still sits unplugged in the morgue basement. But every year on October 21st, it lights up. No cables, no power, just a heartbeat, 67 BPM, steady, waiting. They say hospitals never sleep, but some rooms never stop screaming. It started with a sound, not just any sound, but a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the third floor of St. Enoch's General Hospital at exactly 2:42 a.m. The staff knew that sound all too well. It was coming from room 312. The problem? Room 312 had been empty since last Thursday, when the patient in that bed passed away. Nurses said it was a one-time fluke. Maybe a tech glitch, maybe a hallucination caused by the graveyard shift. But the scream came again the next night. Then again. Same time. Same chilling pitch. And soon, no one wanted to walk past that room after midnight. Let's rewind. 1 week earlier, a man named Howard Knox had been admitted to room 312. Early 50s, unremarkable medical history, admitted for unexplained seizures and night terrors. The first night, he was quiet. But by the second, the screaming began. High-pitched, desperate, guttural. The kind of scream that makes your skin tighten and your ears ring long after it stops. He kept yelling one phrase. "She's in the wall." At first, staff assumed he was just confused, ICU psychosis or residual trauma. But then he started describing the woman in detail. Not just what she looked like, but where she was. Behind the drywall. Crawling between rooms. Peeking through electrical outlets. Watching. Doctors sedated him. They wrote it off as delusions. But 2 nurses quit after just 3 days of covering his room. One refused to talk about it. The other said she saw something. A face, she claimed, twisted and pale, peering from inside the vent above his bed. On the 4th night, Howard flatlined. No warning. His monitor spiked. His body convulsed violently. And then, silence. His final words? "Don't let her out." They removed the body, sanitized the room, locked it temporarily. But then, the scream began. Let's pause and analyze this. Hospitals are liminal spaces, thresholds between life and death. That alone makes them emotionally charged. But they're also built in layers. Renovations stack atop old blueprints. Rooms are sealed, vents rerouted, spaces forgotten. People often say spirits get trapped in places. But what if it's not the spirit of the dead that lingers? What if it's something older? Something that feeds on transitions? Someone like Howard might have just been its most recent host. The scream returned every night for 6 consecutive days after his death. always at 2:42 a.m. It wasn't played through speakers. It wasn't something patients or staff imagined. It was heard by people on 3 different floors. Some even said it felt directional, like it was coming from inside their own heads. Security reviewed footage from room 312. No movement, but when they adjusted the audio, isolating the frequencies, they picked up something hidden beneath the scream. A voice, a whisper, repeating something under the surface noise. A slow, breathy repetition of the words, "I was here first." By the 6th night, a patient across the hall began screaming too. A young woman recovering from surgery. She thrashed in her bed, tearing out her claiming someone was standing at the foot of it, holding something sharp. Staff sedated her, but she kept screaming until sunrise. Her roommate said she never saw anything, except the wall light flickering rhythmically, like something was trying to communicate through it. Now here's where things get even stranger. A night orderly, let's call him Miguel, was doing rounds that same evening. He passed room 312 and stopped. The door had been locked all week, yet now it stood open just a crack. Inside, the room was dark, but something caught his attention. The sound of breathing, raspy, uneven. He pushed the door open. No one was there, but the walls, they were wet, not just humid, dripping, like the plaster itself was sweating. He turned on the lights. That's when he saw it. Scratch marks inside the vent. Deep, frantic gouges in the metal lining. Human-sized fingernail marks, like someone or something had been trying to claw its way out. He closed the door and walked away. 2 hours later, Miguel handed in his resignation. He never explained why. Just said the job wasn't worth staying for. Hospital administration decided to seal the room. Not just close it, seal it. Drywall over the door. Disconnect the wiring. Pretend it never existed. But the scream didn't stop. It moved. It started showing up in different parts of the hospital. ICU, neonatal ward, even the chapel. Always at 2:42 a.m. Always the same pitch. The same panic. Then came the dreams. Several staff members reported having identical nightmares. Dreams of lying in a hospital bed, paralyzed. Fluorescent lights above them. And from the corner of the ceiling, a pale hand reaching down. Always the same hand. Always the same feeling. If I scream, she'll know I'm awake. Sleep deprivation set in. Staff rotations changed. 2 more nurses left. And then, inexplicably, the hospital had a wiring failure, isolated to the old section of the 3rd floor. When the electricians opened the walls to inspect the damage, they found something embedded between 2 beams. An object, a small, rusted hospital ID badge. The photo was faded, but the name was barely legible. Eleanor V. Sandhurst, pediatric nurse, died. 1974. Records showed she had died on site. Cause of death, unknown. The case had been buried, suppressed. But legend had it she disappeared after locking herself in a room with a patient who was never logged into the system. The same room that would later be renumbered as 312. So now the question lingers, was Howard Knox screaming because he was haunted? Or because he understood that something had been there long before him, that the room was never his, that the hospital had forgotten her, but she hadn't forgotten the hospital. And if the scream continues, maybe she never left. Maybe she's just looking for someone new to scream for her. They say the human brain stays active for a few minutes after death. But what if it's not the brain that stays behind, it's something else? This story begins not in an operating room, not in a patient bed, but in a morgue, where a man opened his eyes inside the freezer. His name was Marcus Dial, a 49-year-old warehouse supervisor, average in every possible way except for how he died. Or more precisely, didn't. Marcus collapsed at work after complaining of tightness in his chest. No previous medical conditions, no warning signs, just a sudden blackout. By the time the ambulance arrived, he had no pulse. Medics attempted resuscitation for 11 minutes. Nothing. Flatline. He was pronounced dead on the scene. And that's when the story should have ended. But it didn't. He was transported to St. Elora's General, a mid-sized hospital just outside Eugene, Oregon. There, he was processed by a night shift technician named Sarah, who, in her own words, had done this hundreds of times. She noted nothing strange. No movement, no warmth, no breath. Marcus was tagged and wheeled into freezer drawer number 4. It was supposed to be routine. It wasn't. 2 hours later, at 3:17 a.m., Sarah reported hearing a bang. One dull thud, like someone hitting the inside of a filing cabinet. She paused her work, thinking it might be a janitor. Then it happened again. Bang. Only louder. Closer. The sound was coming from the freezer room. At first, she thought it was the compressor kicking in. But when she opened the door, the entire space was still. Still, except for drawer number 4. The metal tray had pushed out by 3 inches. She didn't scream. Not yet. Instead, she walked toward it with a kind of mechanical calm, like when your brain refuses to accept what it's seeing. The toe tag on the drawer read, Marcus Dial, and then the drawer moved again, outward, on its own. Sarah stumbled backward, slamming into the wall. She said she felt something, like static crawling up her arms. The tray was now fully extended, and the sheet covering Marcus was visibly rising. Something underneath was breathing. She saw his chest expand. Once, twice. Marcus Dial was alive. Or at least something wearing Marcus's skin was pretending to be. Now, this is where the records get strange. Hospital logs show that emergency staff were called in. Doctors swore they found Marcus with a stable pulse, shallow. But there. He was warmed and placed under observation. No explanation could be given. Misdiagnosed death was the official line, though internal emails show confusion and even fear among staff. But here's what's truly disturbing. Marcus didn't speak. Not that night. Not the next day. He blinked. He breathed. But no matter what questions they asked, where he'd been, what he remembered, what he felt, he gave them the same thing every time. A slow, unsettling smile. Some theorized brain damage. A neurological anomaly. Others weren't so sure. One nurse, who requested anonymity, claimed Marcus made eye contact with her during the night shift and whispered something she'll never forget. It's warmer down there. By the 3rd day, Marcus began to deteriorate. His skin turned waxy and pale. He stopped responding altogether. An MRI showed an unusual drop in brain activity, lower than coma patients. But what confused doctors most was what happened just before he died. Again. Security footage shows Marcus lying motionless in his bed. At 2:03 a.m., he sat up straight, spine rigid, eyes wide. He turned and looked directly at the camera, like he knew it was watching. Then he mouthed 2 words. Drawer 4. He flatlined seconds later. Here's where it turns. 3 days after Marcus's second death, another corpse was placed in drawer number 4. A 72-year-old man named Henry Klaus. He had passed from complications after surgery. Declared dead by a cardiologist. Same technician on shift. Same procedure. That night, the same banging began. Sarah refused to go back into the freezer. This time, a male orderly opened the drawer. Henry Klaus was awake. Eyes wide. Unblinking. But here's the thing. He wasn't gasping for breath. He wasn't confused. He was smiling. And he was mouthing something just like Marcus had. Drawer 4. The hospital shut down that freezer room the following week. It was labeled faulty, and a new one was installed in another wing. But in the months that followed, whispers continued. Staff say drawer 4 was removed and incinerated. But records show it was never taken off inventory. It still has a barcode in the system. Still reads active. Still open. Now let's step back and ask, what really happened? Some paranormal researchers suggest what's called a liminal loop. It's a theory that certain locations become stuck between states, between life and death, awareness and unconsciousness. Drawer 4 might not be haunted by a ghost, but by a pattern, a circuit. What's even more sinister is this. It doesn't just affect the dead. It calls to the dying. In both cases, Marcus and Henry, their conditions weren't terminal. Their vitals had a chance. But both ended up there. Like they were chosen. It raises a terrifying idea. What if drawer 4 doesn't store the dead? It finishes them? The smile. The repeated phrase. The unnatural awareness just before death. It's as if something inside that drawer learns. Waits. And when someone wakes up inside, it doesn't let them leave as themselves. Hospitals are filled with rational minds. Doctors, nurses, scientists. But even they avoid certain rooms after dark. Even they ignore certain noises. And in some hospitals, even the dead don't stay where you put them. So the next time you hear someone say they survived a near-death experience, ask them this: did they wake up in a hospital bed? Or in a freezer drawer smiling? They say hospitals never truly sleep. But what they don't tell you is that some patients check in without ever being alive. It started during the overnight shift. Those strange, stretched out hours between 2 and 5 a.m. when the world outside falls eerily silent. And even time inside the hospital feels like it's holding its breath. Lisa had been a night nurse at St. Anthony's Medical Center for 6 years. A seasoned pro. She'd seen it all. Residents falling asleep mid-suture. Elderly patients whispering to people who weren't there. Even a cleaner who swore he saw his dead mother in the ICU hallway. But what happened that night was different. Room 209 had been empty for over a week. It was a pediatric recovery room. Small, sterile, quiet. The kind of place designed to make children feel safe but always ended up feeling cold and wrong when no one was in it. At exactly 2:36 a.m., Lisa noticed something odd on her monitor. Room 209 had a vitals readout. Pulse, 0. Respiration, 0. Blood pressure, null. And yet, movement detected. She blinked. No one had been assigned to that room. No codes had been input. No one had wheeled in a gurney. Curious, and a little unnerved, she stood up from her desk and headed down the east hallway. The corridor to 209 was dim, half-lit from the emergency bulbs that flickered in slow rhythm, like a dying heartbeat. Lisa paused outside the room and felt something off. The air seemed thicker, harder to breathe, like walking into a space that didn't want her there. The door was ajar. She pushed it open slowly and froze. There, in the bed, was a girl, no older than 9, pale, unmoving. Her eyes were closed, her hair was damp, and she wore a hospital gown that seemed oddly faded. Not old, just out of place, almost like it belonged to another time. Lisa instinctively checked the chart hanging at the end of the bed. There was nothing. Blank. No name. No medical ID. No intake time. Just a clipboard with a clean sheet of paper. Lisa's skin crawled. Still trying to keep her composure, she reached for the girl's wrist. No pulse. But the girl's skin was warm. She turned to leave and call for assistance. But as she stepped into the hallway, a soft voice echoed behind her. "Where's my mother?" Lisa turned around, heart racing. The girl was sitting up, eyes now open. But here's the thing. Lisa hadn't heard the bedsheets move. The ECG hadn't picked up a blip. And even now, standing, breathing, speaking, the monitor still read. Pulse, 0. Respiration, 0. Lisa stared, stunned. "Sweetheart, can you tell me your name?" The girl tilted her head. She said she'd be back. But she never came back. There was no emotion in her voice. No urgency. Just a distant echo of a thought. Lisa backed away and paged the front desk. "I've got an unregistered pediatric patient in 209. No chart. No vitals. I need someone down here now." No one responded. She tried again. Silence. The hospital comms were down. But everything else was working. Lisa looked back at the girl. She was gone. Not in the bed. Not under it. The room was empty. The vitals monitor, still flashing. Pulse, 0. Later that morning, Lisa pulled the hallway security footage for 2:30 to 3 a.m. The camera faced directly at the entrance to room 209. She fast-forwarded through the footage. She watched herself walk down the corridor. She watched herself pause at the door. She watched herself push the door open, and then walk inside. But on the footage, the room was dark, pitch black, No lights. No movement. She never came back out. Seconds later, on the screen, her figure simply wasn't there anymore. She rewound and rewatched it. Same thing. Entry. Darkness. Then gone. But she was still here. Still alive. So what had the camera seen? That night, she returned to her shift. But something was wrong. Staff looked at her strangely. Like they didn't recognize her. Like they were surprised to see her. And then came the kicker. Her ID badge no longer worked. When she asked the charge nurse, Melissa, what was going on, Melissa blinked. Lisa, you haven't worked here in 3 years. You quit after that breakdown, remember? Lisa stared in disbelief. What breakdown? Melissa hesitated. Room 209. You found an empty bed. But you insisted a girl was there. A girl who died weeks earlier. No, she was there last night. She spoke to me. Melissa frowned. Lisa, that room's been sealed for years. Ever since the electrical fire. There hasn't been power to the monitors in there since 2022. Lisa's hands trembled. But the vitals. Melissa shook her head. There were none. You imagined them. Just like the girl. But Lisa knew better. She remembered the girl's eyes. The way she stared straight through her. She remembered her voice. Low, glassy. Like wind through an open window. Where's my mother? And here's the thing no one ever figured out. The next night, a new nurse, Anthony, was making rounds on the second floor when he caught sight of someone standing at the end of the hallway near room 209. A small girl. No movement. Just standing, facing the window. He approached, asking if she was lost. But when he reached her, there was no one there. No sound. Just the faint click of a vitals monitor. He turned and looked at room 209's door. It was open. Inside, the ECG monitor blinked. Pulse, 0. Respiration, 0. Patient, unregistered. Since then, room 209 has been quietly removed from the digital floor plan. Ask anyone who's worked at St. Anthony's for long enough, and they'll tell you, under breath or behind closed doors, that you can still hear her voice if you walk past at just the right time. Not every night, but on the right night. When's my mother coming back? They say she was a child who died in surgery. Others claim she was never a real patient, but something else entirely. A presence that slipped through during a code blue and never left. But here's what chills staff the most. No matter how many times they wipe the system, her file always returns. No name, no date, just a single note at the bottom of the chart. Still waiting. They never found her in any records. No ID badge. No uniform. Just a pale woman who appeared by the bedsides of patients moments before they flatlined, and always vanished before staff could ask who let her in. At St. Evelyn's Medical Center in Oregon, the ICU staff eventually stopped talking about her. Not because they stopped seeing her, but because no one wanted to admit how many times she had appeared. It began in room 7. A man named Walter Griggs was admitted for late-stage liver failure. According to his night nurse, Mr. Griggs had been drifting in and out of consciousness for days. Mumbling, hallucinating, sometimes crying out for a woman named Alice. There was no Alice listed in his emergency contacts. No mention in his medical history. But that night, around 2:30 a.m., the nurse came in to check vitals and found Walter calm for the first time in days. Silent. Still. Awake. Just staring at the far corner of the room. When she asked what he was looking at, he whispered, "She's here. The lady in black." She said it's almost time. Walter died 11 minutes later. Peacefully. No alarms. No struggle. And when security reviewed the hallway footage, no one had entered or exited his room between rounds. They assumed it was delirium. Until it happened again. 3 nights later, a cancer patient named Lorraine woke up screaming. Staff rushed in, thinking she was having a seizure. But she wasn't convulsing. She wasn't even confused. Just terrified. According to her chart, she said something strange right before she passed out. She was sitting in the chair, watching me breathe. That chair. Same placement. Same corner. Same room. Room 7. After Lorraine passed, the the hospital quietly moved all incoming patients out of that room. It was closed for maintenance for nearly 2 weeks. But when the cleaning crew finally went in, they reported something unnerving. Despite no one using the room since Lorraine's death, the indentation in the chair's cushion remained. Deep, fresh, as if someone had been sitting there every night. And then came the whispers. Across the ICU, in different rooms, different wings, patients began reporting the same vision. A pale woman in a long, dark coat, sometimes at the foot of the bed, sometimes in the reflection of 4 poles. Always silent, always watching, and always seen by those who wouldn't make it to morning. One nurse, shaken, confided to her supervisor after her 5th encounter with a patient who mentioned the woman. They see her before we pronounce the time. It's like she's already marked them. But what unsettled the staff the most was how eerily consistent the descriptions were. Elderly, young, delirious, or fully lucid. They all said the same thing. A woman with no eyes. Just black, hollow spaces where they should be. And a mouth that didn't move when she spoke. One patient, a retired psychiatrist named Dr. Harold Lynn, even tried to sketch her before he passed. The drawing, which was quietly removed from his file by his family, showed a figure cloaked in a dark, flowing coat. Her face blank, but her hands were drawn elongated. Not claws, not monstrous, just wrong. Thin, skeletal fingers that seemed to bend too many times, like they were folding into themselves. When Dr. Lin died, he was found clutching that drawing. Staff say he had written something on the back. Just one sentence. She only visits the ones who know. What that means, no one's quite sure. But theories started spreading. Some said she was a hallucination, the brain's way of coping with the inevitable. Others believed she was something worse. A conductor of sorts. An usher between this world and whatever lies beneath it. But there's one account that still circulates through the night shift like a ghost story. A nurse named Casey was working a double shift in 2021 during a particularly chaotic night. The ICU was overcrowded, understaffed, and overwhelmed. One of her patients, a 22-year-old accident victim in critical condition, suddenly stabilized. Hours earlier, they had nearly lost him. Now he was awake, calm, breathing steadily. Casey, exhausted but hopeful, went to check on him. He looked her in the eyes and asked softly, "Do you see her?" Casey paused. "See who?" He looked toward the window even though the blinds were down. "She's smiling, but it's not real. She doesn't blink." Casey gently assured him no one was there. But when she turned to check the window herself, there was a reflection. Not hers, not his. A third shape, thin, tall, standing just behind her. When she whipped around, nothing. The room was empty. The patient died less than an hour later. Cause of death: respiratory failure. But his charts had been improving all day. There was no medical reason for him to decline so quickly. After that night, Casey put in for a transfer. She never worked ICU again. Some skeptics say it's the power of suggestion. That patients nearing death hallucinate common archetypes. And nurses, overstressed and exhausted, start seeing patterns that don't exist. But here's the problem. There have been non-patients who've seen her too. A janitor named Eli, who worked the graveyard shift, reported seeing a woman walking barefoot through the east wing. When security was called, they found no one. But Eli, who had been cleaning near the operating suites, swore she looked right at him and mouthed something he couldn't hear. He later told his supervisor, "She doesn't make noise when she walks. It's like the floor bends around her." Eli quit that week. What makes this phenomenon so disturbing isn't just the sightings. It's the timing. It's who sees her and when. The visitors, the terminal, the forgotten, those closest to the edge. And always just once. Never again. You see her, and then you don't. One last haunting detail. Every account places her presence around 3:17 a.m. That's the time most patients flatlined after reporting her. Not 3 o'clock, not 3:30, precisely 3:17. Some spiritualists claim that time holds significance, the inverse of divine numbers, or a ripple between realms. Hospitals, after all, are liminal spaces. Doors always opening, people always leaving or crossing over. But what if they don't leave alone? What if there's someone or something already waiting, not to harm, not even to help, just to watch, quiet, still, patient, a visitor, only the dying can see. They say when a patient dies on the table, not everything gets left behind. Sometimes something leaves with you, and sometimes you don't even notice until it's too late to give it back. This story comes from a surgical tech who, after one routine operation, realized he'd brought something out of the or that was never supposed to follow him. It started on a Monday, a standard cardiac procedure at a regional hospital that rarely saw anything out of the ordinary. The patient, a 67-year-old man, was wheeled into the or just before sunrise. Nothing unusual. The tech had prepped dozens of rooms, monitored even more cases, but something about that morning felt still. Not quiet, but motionless, as if the entire hallway were holding its breath. The patient coded halfway through. Cardiac arrest. There was a blur of motion, alarms, compressions. The attending surgeon muttered a prayer under his breath, as if he already knew. They called time of death at 7:46 a.m. That's when it began. The tech was tasked with post-op cleanup. He'd done it 100 times. Strip the table, dispose of biohazards, reset for the next case. But the moment he entered the or alone, something shifted. The air was heavier, colder, like someone had opened a walk-in freezer. And there was a smell. Not blood, not antiseptic, but old soil. Damp wood. A forest after rain. A smell that had no business being in a sterile environment. He chalked it up to stress, lack of sleep, routine burnout, but it followed him. That same evening, walking to his car, he felt someone behind him, steps echoing just slightly out of sync with his own. When he turned, nothing. Only the faint squeak of a hospital gurney echoing from somewhere deep inside the parking structure. Over the next week, it escalated. His badge would beep into locked doors before he swiped it. Monitors in patient rooms he wasn't in would flash his login. One night, while checking inventory, the or lights flipped on by themselves, flickering as if responding to something unspoken. Then came the whispering, low, rasped, right behind his ear. Always the same phrase, "You should have stayed." He tried to laugh it off, blamed his fraying nerves. He'd even scheduled therapy. But things weren't just happening to him anymore. Other staff began to notice. One nurse saw a man in surgical scrubs standing behind him in the mirror of the staff break room. But when she turned, he was alone. Another caught sight of someone walking with him down the corridor. Someone who vanished the second they passed through a hallway camera's blind spot. The tech reviewed the security footage himself. At 2:13 a.m., he could be seen walking past the nurse's station. And for exactly 1.5 seconds, there was a shadow next to him. Not a reflection, not a trick of light, something with shoulders. A vague outline of a man that blurred the wall as it passed. That night he had a dream. He was back in the OR. Alone. The monitors were screaming flatlines. The lights were dim, humming. And in the corner of the room, slumped in a wheelchair, was the patient who had died that Monday. Except he wasn't dead. He was staring at him with eyes completely black. He raised a hand, slow, trembling, and pointed straight at him. Not angry, not accusatory, just desperate, like he was begging him to come back. The tech woke up to find dried blood beneath his fingernails. He hadn't touched a patient in over 24 hours. He started digging. The patient who died had no family, no visitors. But when the tech pulled his intake notes, something odd stood out. Under psych history, a single line. Insists he was followed into the hospital by a double. Refuses to undergo surgery unless he leaves the room first. There was even a handwritten note clipped to the file, likely from the intake nurse, hastily scribbled. Creepy guy keeps looking at the ceiling corner and whispering. Says it's the only place he can't reach him. That corner, he knew exactly which one. It was the northeast corner of or 6. The same corner the overhead lights always flickered during late-night procedures. The same one the janitor refused to mop under. The tech tried to forget. He really did. But he couldn't unhear the whispers. Couldn't unsee that outline in every reflection. Couldn't ignore the fact that patients he worked with, only him, started reporting sleep paralysis. Or seeing someone standing at their bedside when no one was scheduled. One night, walking past the OR, he heard the monitors beeping again. That specific tone, a flatline spike followed by a mechanical whine. Except no one was scheduled. The room was locked. And when he peered through the narrow glass window, he saw himself, standing at the table, operating, alone, with a figure slumped across from him, and both of them, staring directly at the door. He ran, transferred out 2 weeks later, moved 3 states away. No explanation, no goodbye. But the thing is, he says it didn't help. The elevator in his new hospital, sometimes it opens on the basement, even when he doesn't press the button. The break room fridge, things move around when no one's there. And on some nights, when he's cleaning instruments alone after a long shift, he swears he can hear footsteps, not just behind him, walking with him, like someone never left, like someone followed him out of surgery. They say hospitals are designed to save lives. But what if one part of the building never got the memo? What if an elevator, just one, only ever takes you to the one place you were never supposed to go? It started with an intern. That's how most hospital horror stories begin. Tired, overworked, and ignored. Her name was Maya, and she was doing her residency at St. Elora's Medical Center. It wasn't a fancy hospital. In fact, the building was half a century old. The kind with flickering fluorescents and elevators that sighed like they were exhaling their last breath every time the doors opened. Maya had heard the rumors before. Every intern does. Don't take elevator C after midnight. If it opens for you when you haven't pressed the button, walk away. Most brush it off as stress-induced hallucination or a cruel joke passed down by senior staff. But Maya wasn't so quick to dismiss things. Not after what happened in her first week. It was a Wednesday night. She had just finished a 20-hour shift in the trauma unit and was dead on her feet. Her apartment was across town, and the idea of climbing 6 flights of stairs to the parking structure made her want to cry. So when elevator C opened without her pressing anything, it felt like mercy. She stepped inside. There were no floor buttons lit. The panel looked old, too old. Half the numbers were scratched off, and the emergency call button looked welded shut. She pressed 6. The button didn't light up. Nothing did. Then the elevator jolted. Not moved, jolted. As if it had to remember how to function. The overhead lights flickered. The hum of motion started, but the numbers above the door didn't change. Then it began to descend. Slowly. Too slowly. The air thickened. Her ears popped like she was going underground. And then the doors opened, but not on the parking level. Basement. There was no B on the button panel. There wasn't even a basement floor listed in the blueprints she'd seen during orientation. But there it was, basement. The lights outside the elevator were dimmer than they should have been. More like the kind you see in emergency generators, dull orange, barely lighting the corridor. She told herself it was just the boiler room, a maintenance sublevel. Nothing unusual. But her gut screamed otherwise. Still, curiosity is stronger than fear, at least for the first few seconds. She stepped out. The air was freezing, not cold, wrong, like it had never been breathed in by a living thing. The hallway stretched out, walls lined with outdated signage, handwritten charts, metal signs bolted into concrete. The kind of place that hasn't seen an update in decades. And then she heard it. A gurney wheel turning slowly. Squeak, 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 echoing around a corner she couldn't see. No voices, no intercoms, just that slow, sick rhythm. She backed up, pressed the elevator button again. No light, no sound. It didn't come back. So she walked, down the hallway trying not to breathe too loudly, past empty operating rooms with doors cracked open just enough to see rust-colored stains on old tiles. Past a room labeled electroshock recovery. One with a broken window and restraints still on the bed. She tried calling her phone. No signal. Just static. And then, a voice. Maya. It wasn't loud. It wasn't whispered. It was right behind her. She turned fast. Nothing. Empty corridor. But the air was warmer now. Not comforting, clammy. Like something had exhaled directly on her neck. She ran. She doesn't remember how long. Just corridors that looped. Doors that weren't there before. An old surgical theater filled with standing water. A broken wheelchair still rocking by itself. Eventually, she found a stairwell. The door was cracked open, and inside, black mold bloomed across every inch of the concrete wall. But she didn't care. She climbed until her legs gave out, kicked open a door, and found herself in the cafeteria on the second floor. Nobody believed her. Not officially. Not the next morning when she tried to file a report. Not when she begged her supervisor to check the elevator maintenance logs. They said Elevator C had been out of service for months. That it was sealed off. Inaccessible. But something had opened it for her. That should have been the end of it. But a week later, another resident vanished during a night shift. The only security footage showed him stepping into Elevator C and never coming out. The tape cut out for exactly 3 minutes. When it resumed, the elevator was empty. No passenger. No descent. Just static, and then the floor panel flashing B. An investigation was launched, but quietly. HR shut down the talk. Elevator C was permanently locked down. Welded, chained, even covered in plasterboard. But the rumors only grew louder. Some say the basement was once a psychiatric wing, decommissioned after a fire in the 1960s. A wing where treatments were unethical, where patients were buried instead of discharged. Others say it was a morgue, but not an official one. A place where doctors could hide their mistakes. Whatever it was, it never made it into the hospital's official layout. No one will admit it ever existed. But janitors talk, and night staff whisper. They say you can still hear that gurney wheel turning sometimes, even behind the sealed wall. And every few months someone says they saw it. Elevator C. Doors wide open. Waiting. And it never takes you up. It never takes you to where you want to go. It only stops on the basement floor. And the worst part? They say if it opens for you and you don't get in, you'll still end up there. Just not all at once. Every hospital has a time of night when everything feels wrong. For St. Elora's Medical Center, that time is 3:17 a.m. That's when the weeping begins. Not from a patient, not from a visitor, but from a hallway that hasn't been used in over 12 years. Started as a rumor, the kind new nurses whisper to each other on their first overnights. They'd say, if you hear crying near Ward C after 3, don't follow it. Don't even look down that hall. But of course, someone always does. And they always regret it. St. Elora's was built in the 1960s. An old Catholic hospital with narrow corridors, tiled floors that echo, and walls the color of dust. Ward C had once housed long-term care patients, mostly elderly people waiting out their final months. But in 2013, a wing of the hospital caught fire. No one talks about what caused it. Officially, it was electrical. Unofficially, staff say something went wrong in room 313. Something they covered up. The wing was sealed. The ward shut down. And for a while it was forgotten. Until the crying began. First it was faint. Staff on the overnight shift would hear what sounded like a girl sobbing. Not screaming. Not panicked. Just heartbreakingly sad. The sound would start precisely at 3:17 a.m. and end 4 minutes later. Every single night. Security would check the feed, nothing. Maintenance investigated air ducts, water pipes, rodents. Nothing. Some nurses thought it was a prank. Others said it was a residual echo, a grief that had soaked into the walls. But others believed it was her. In 2019, a nurse named Carmen joined the night staff. She was experienced, practical, the kind of woman who didn't scare easily, until she worked her third night. That night, she stayed late catching up on patient charts. Around 3:10, she heard the intercom in the break room crackle, then go dead. Moments later, the weeping began. Low, mournful. A young woman crying in the dark. Carmen, thinking it was someone in distress, grabbed her flashlight and followed the sound. It led her down an empty hall, toward the sealed doors of Ward C. The cry came from behind them. She stood there listening, frozen. Then the crying stopped. What replaced it was worse. Knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks from the other side of the doors. Then something whispered her name. She never went near that hallway again. Since then, more staff have had encounters. A janitor reported finding faint bloody footprints leading from the locked doors of Ward C to the stairwell. Footprints that vanished halfway down. A pediatric resident claimed she saw a girl in a hospital gown standing in the corridor mirror. But when she turned around, no one was there. Some even claimed they saw lights flicker in room 313, though the power had been cut to that entire ward. The hospital tried to explain it away, but late last year, a curious intern decided to dig deeper. Her name was Eliza. Eliza was fascinated by the supernatural. She believed hospitals were thin places, where the veil between life and death is fragile. She heard the rumors, and instead of running, she recorded them, documented staff interviews, created a timeline. What she uncovered was disturbing. In 2013, the night of the fire, a 17-year-old girl named Myra had been admitted to room 313. She wasn't dying. She'd been misdiagnosed with a rare sleep disorder, something that caused vivid hallucinations, night terrors. She would cry uncontrollably between 3 and 4 a.m. every night. Staff sedated her, moved her to a room alone so she wouldn't disturb other patients. One nurse even noted in her log that Myra was crying to someone who wasn't there. On the night of the fire, Myra had begged a nurse to stay. She said, "Don't leave me. It watches me when I sleep." But they left. The fire began in her room. By the time help arrived, the door was locked from the inside. No one could explain how. Myra was never found. Eliza's discovery should have brought closure. Instead, it brought something else. 2 weeks after she shared her findings with hospital staff, she was found unconscious outside the doors of Ward C. She had claw marks on her arms, but no signs of forced entry. Her watch had stopped at 3:17 a.m. When she woke up, she didn't speak. Not for days. When she finally did, she only said one thing. She wasn't crying for help. She was mourning something or someone. So what does it all mean? Some say Myra's cries are a loop in time, a trauma echoing through the walls forever. Others believe it's not her at all, but something pretending to be her, mimicking the sound of sorrow to lure people in. There's a theory in paranormal psychology that spirits become strongest not when they're angry, but when they're forgotten, when no one remembers the pain they carried. Maybe that's why the crying persists, because no one listened when it mattered. What's chilling is how precise it all is. 3:17 a.m. Not a minute sooner. Not a second later. Why that time? Myra's last log entry, recorded by the nurse's tablet, was saved at 3:17 a.m., moments before the fire alarm sounded. It read, "I'm not alone anymore. And if you think it's just a story, here's the part that keeps even the skeptics quiet." Just last month, a doctor on call stayed late to prep for surgery. Around 3:15, he felt the air go cold, heard soft weeping from down the corridor. He looked up from his desk and saw a pale figure standing just beyond the glass. Long dark hair, hospital gown, staring directly at him. He blinked, and she was gone. But when he turned back to his desk, his computer clock had frozen. At 3:17 a.m., he requested a transfer the next morning. Didn't say why. And the weeping still hasn't stopped. Every night, at 3:17, she cries. They say the camera never lies. But what if it shows something you never did? In October of 2017, a routine hospital night shift turned into something no one could explain. A seasoned nurse, an unremarkable room, and 12 seconds of security footage that still hasn't been removed from the system, because no one dares delete it. Not after what happened. I was 3 years into my job as an overnight nurse at a mid-sized hospital in northern Illinois. I won't name it because the administration still tries to pretend nothing happened. But anyone who worked there that year knows about room 329. And what happened on the third floor between 2:12 and 2:13 a.m. It started with a patient, an elderly man, admitted for complications after a minor stroke. Nothing unusual. He was lucid, a little confused at times, but nothing that stood out. Except for one thing. He refused to sleep if the door was closed. And he kept asking for someone named Sarah. There was no Sarah on staff. Every time we checked on him, he'd say the same thing. She was just here. She stood over my bed. His voice never sounded afraid, just tired. Like he'd accepted something we hadn't. The night he died, I was the only nurse assigned to his wing. I'd passed by room 329 around 2 a.m., saw he was asleep, and kept moving. I charted vitals at the station. Normal. Routine. The kind of night where everything blurs into the same fluorescent haze. Until the call button for room 329 lit up. I walked back. When I entered, the man was sitting upright, staring at the foot of the bed. He didn't look surprised to see me, just sad. She already left, he said softly. You just missed her. He lay back down. A minute later, the heart monitor went flat. He died right there, peacefully. No struggle. No drama. I did what I was trained to do. Called the doctor, prepped the body, made the report. I even made a joke with the night janitor on my way back to the station. But when I sat down at the desk, the hallway monitor, the one linked to the security cameras, was still playing back footage from room 329. I didn't pay attention at first. But then something caught my eye. I leaned in. At exactly 2:12 a.m., the room door opens. I see a figure enter. A nurse. That's normal, right? Except, I never went in at that time. I was charting vitals. I remember because I signed off at 2:10 and printed the chart. There's a timestamp on it. But on the footage, there I was. My uniform. My walk. Even the way I pull my sleeves down. It was all unmistakably me. I stood beside the bed for 12 seconds. I didn't check vitals. I didn't adjust the 4. I just stood there, motionless, staring. Then I turned and walked out. I froze. I must have watched that loop 20 times. The footage was crystal clear. But I knew I wasn't in that room at 2:12. Still, I thought maybe I forgot. Maybe I walked in, zoned out. Night shifts mess with your memory. Maybe the timeline in my head was just wrong. So I did what you'd expect. I pulled up the hallway footage. The camera by the nurse's station shows me sitting the entire time. No breaks. No movement. Just me, hunched over the chart, sipping lukewarm coffee. While I stood in room 329, watching a dying man sleep. There was no glitch. No evidence of tampering. I checked every angle, every frame. They all confirmed the same thing. I was in 2 places at once. I didn't tell anyone right away. What could I say? Hey, I just watched myself visit a patient who saw a woman no one else could see, then died right after? But the guilt stuck with me. Maybe I missed something. Maybe I could have helped. So 2 nights later, I asked security to pull more footage from that wing. I didn't tell them why. What they found chilled me. The same me appeared on 2 other tapes. Each time standing at a different patient's bed. Each patient died within 20 minutes. Each time I was provably elsewhere, caught on another camera, logged into a different terminal or talking to staff. Always at the exact same moment. Worse, when they slowed down the footage. The figure looked off. Too still. Almost mannequin-like. The shoulders never rose with breath. The head never turned. Just blank, mechanical imitation. It wasn't me. Or, it was something pretending. Hospital legends aren't rare. Everyone's got a story about a cursed room or a cold spot or an elevator that takes you to a floor that doesn't exist. But this was different. Documented. Tangible. Replayable. I started digging. And I wasn't the only one. An older nurse, retired now, told me about a similar incident from 2004. Different patient, different room. But the same detail. A staff member appearing in 2 places at once. Back then, they dismissed it as a glitch. She told me something I'll never forget. Some people don't just see death coming. They see who brings it. I asked her what she meant. They don't die alone. Something waits. Not evil, just inevitable. She believed that hospitals, places between life and death, sometimes attract echoes, fragments, imprints of people who spend too long in liminal spaces. And sometimes those echoes get confused. They copy the living, they visit the dying, and they leave behind just enough evidence to haunt the ones left behind. I eventually reported the footage. It was quietly archived and removed from staff access. I was told to stop asking questions. They didn't fire me, but they moved me to a different floor. Day shift, pediatrics, far from room 329. I accepted, and I've never worked a night shift since. But sometimes, late at night, I get emails from the hospital security system. Automatic alerts. Motion detected in room 329. No patient assigned. No staff on record. But always movement. 12 seconds. Then gone. And once, just once, I opened the attachment. It showed a nurse standing over an empty bed. She wore my uniform. She had my posture. But her face was just a blur. And she never blinked. Hospitals are where we go to be saved. But what if one room refuses to let go, even after death? Room 9C hasn't had a patient in years. Not since the night staff received one final call. Long after the room was sealed, long after its last occupant died. Started with a phone call. One that shouldn't have happened. Not because it was late. Not because it was unexpected. But because the phone it came from had been disconnected for 3 years. It was just past 2:40 a.m. when the switchboard lit up at St. Eustace Medical, a mid-sized hospital in upstate New York. The night operator, Claire, logged it like any other call. Incoming line. Internal extension. Room 9C. She blinked at the screen. Room 9C? Her eyes darted to the whiteboard beside her desk. The floor assignment chart. There was no 9C listed. In fact, the 9th floor had been completely vacated since the fire in 2019. Renovations were still incomplete. Power had been rerouted. And all internal phones were officially disabled. Curious, Claire answered anyway. All she heard was static. And then, under it, the unmistakable click of someone hanging up. She brushed it off as a technical glitch. Hospitals are old. Wires do weird things in old buildings. Still, she logged the call out of habit more than anything. But it wasn't the last. The next night, same time, 2:40 a.m., room 9C called again. This time, the line held. There was no voice, but there was breathing. Slow, labored, as if the caller was trying to say something, but couldn't. She stayed on the line longer this time. Even spoke. Hello? This is the operator. Is someone there? The breathing paused. A faint shuffling noise. And then, something that sent cold down her spine. A distant mechanical beep, like a heart monitor, followed by a single whisper. Help hurts. Then silence. Claire reported it. Maintenance checked the floor. The 9th was still locked. Still under construction. The landlines were still disconnected. But that night, room 9C called again. By the end of the week, 5 calls had come through. Always at the same time. Always from 9C. Word started spreading among the night staff. Nurses joked nervously about the ghost patient. But not everyone was laughing. One nurse, Danny, had worked the hospital for 12 years. When she heard about the calls, her face changed. Pale. Grim. Like something buried deep had just clawed its way up. She asked to see the call log. When she saw the time, 2:40 a.m., she visibly shook. That's when he died, she said. I was there. It was room 9C. Back in 2019, just days before the fire, a man named Joseph Weller had been admitted. A quiet, elderly patient with terminal lung disease. No family. No visitors. Danny remembered him because of one specific request. He didn't want to die alone. Every night, he'd press the call button just to ask if someone was nearby. Even when he couldn't speak anymore, he'd tap on the metal bed rails. Once for yes, twice for no. But on the night of the fire, staffing was thin. Alarms went off. Smoke filled the upper floors. And in the chaos, room 9C was missed. By the time they reached him, the damage to his lungs had accelerated. They stabilized him briefly, but at exactly 2:40 a.m. he coded. No family ever came to claim the body. Danny had always felt they failed him. Forgotten in life. Forgotten in death. Now he was calling back. That night, Claire didn't wait for the phone to ring. At 2:39 a.m., she dialed room 9C herself. It rang. She froze. Shouldn't have rung. Then someone picked up. For a long time there was nothing. Just distant static. Then a faint thud. A dragging sound. And then a soft, shaky voice. Still here. Claire hung up. The next day, she filed an incident report with IT. She wanted facts. She wanted to know how a disconnected room could make or receive calls. The answer came quickly. According to IT records, room 9C hadn't been connected to the system since 2019. No incoming or outgoing logs existed for that extension since the fire. But Claire had her printed call logs, with timestamps, and 9C clearly labeled. When she brought them to the IT department, the logs were blank. The papers she held were now missing entire entries. The calls had vanished. It didn't stop there. Strange occurrences started cropping up in the new ICU unit, 3 floors below. Monitors spiked at 2:40 a.m. with no medical explanation. Patients complained of someone watching them from the doorway. A tall figure, pale, tubes hanging from its nose. A janitor resigned after claiming the elevator skipped his floor, taking him straight to the 9th. When the doors opened, the hallway lights were flickering. And at the far end, room 9C's door was open. Inside, a shadow moved. Staff demanded answers. Security footage was pulled. Cameras on the 9th were motion-triggered, even though that floor was supposed to be offline. One clip, timestamped 2:40 a.m., showed a light turning on inside room 9C. Another showed someone, standing at the window watching the courtyard, but there was no way in. The floor had been sealed for asbestos inspection that week. No one was allowed up. Yet the footage was there. And something else was strange. The figure in the window. It wasn't standing on the floor. It was floating, inches above the ground. The hospital's board ordered an official sweep. Contractors opened the door to 9C for the first time in months. Inside, everything was covered in dust. Except for the phone. It was spotless, like it had been used recently. Worse, it was off the hook. No one said much after that. The hospital quietly changed the floor numbers. The 9th became the new 8th. Room 9C was removed from all maps. But every few months, someone swears they hear a ringing phone behind that sealed door. One nurse said she even picked up the line once, when the switchboard accidentally routed a call. All she heard was a man gasping. And one final word. Alone.